Hello, Year 9s. I'm terribly sorry that I'm away today sick, but luckily for you, that means that I've made you a brief video for story time so you don't miss out on hearing my lovely voice, even though it doesn't sound that great at the moment. So far in our study of World War One, we've focused quite heavily on the commonly accepted causes of the war, so you guys should all know them by now. Good. Australia's response to the call to the war, the role of propaganda in the experiences of Gallipoli, and how this goes to shape Australian national identity in the Anzac myth and legacy. We've also recently taken a close look at a series of primary sources, revealing some of the horrible experiences and conditions faced by Australians on the Western Front. In today's lesson, you'll be getting a broad overview of what the Western Front really entailed for Australians and Anzac forces, and understand the potential costs of such a bloody campaign to both the Australian and the global attitudes to war. Now, we're focusing on the Western Front today, so we could effectively say that was between 1916 and 1918. While Australian troops fought in other places during World War One, men of the Australian Light Horse were sent to the Desert Campaign from 1915 to 18, and they helped drive the Turks out of their territory in the Middle East. However, the majority of Australian forces were sent to the mud and destruction of the Western Front in Europe. For the next 3 years of the war, Australians paid a very heavy price in casualties as they became part of the great battles against the Germans in France and Belgium. In March 1916, when troops of the AIF began to arrive in France, the war along the Western Front had settled into a stalemate or a deadlock. In July, the Australians were ordered into the Great Battle of the Somme. This was a major British and French push along a 30-kilometre front on the Somme River in northern France. It proved to be one of the bloodiest battles of the war. And on the first day, 1st of July 1916, Britain suffered 60,000 casualties, including 20,000 killed. At Fromelles, on the Somme, Australian troops suffered 5,500 casualties in one day. A few days later, the Anzac troops were ordered into the battle in an attempt to break the German lines at Poitiers. In some of the most brutal fighting endured by the troops during the war, the AIF suffered another 23,000 casualties in 7 weeks. By the end of the year, there were over 42,000 Australian casualties on the Western Front. In 1917, the British launched a new offensive in Flanders, in Belgium. And again, the Australian and New Zealand troops were ordered in. Between April and November 1917, the Australian and New Zealand troops took part in many of the battles that sought to break the German lines near the town of Ypres. Beginning when they attacked the important Messines Ridge, in June 1917 in an attack planned by the Australian commander, General John Monash. In a week of heavy fighting, Messines Ridge fell, with 10,000 Australians and 5,000 New Zealand casualties. The final battle of the tragic Flanders campaign began on October 1917 for the village of Passchendaele near Ypres. Rain had fallen almost unceasingly throughout October, transforming the scarred battlefield into a mud lake. Troops and supplies bogged down, and by November it took 16 men instead of 2 to carry the stretcher cases to the field dressing stations. Yet in these indescribable conditions, the Battle of Passchendaele went on until November, when the hopelessness of the situation was realised. This raised an extraordinary amount of records, diary entries and photographs that pointed out the bloody, muddy, disgusting, horrible, frightful nature of death and warfare that was unseen until this point in the war. "I died in hell," wrote the English war poet Siegfried Sassoon. They called it Passchendaele. The campaign in Flanders in 1917 had raged for 5 months, and in that time the British suffered 245,000 men killed or wounded and had advanced a total distance of 11 kilometres. The battles in Flanders produced 76,800 Australian casualties in total.